Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. On today's podcast, I get to interview my new friend and business colleague, Andy Bardon, who is actually a professional photographer, director, and contributor at National Geographic magazine. I know so many people out there in the photography world would aspire to be a part of National Geographic, and I knew what an iconic publication that once was in my mind. And I'm thrilled to have Andy on the show. I love when he talks about, in particular, a quote by Rodney Mullen, the professional skateboarder, about breaking the barrier of disbelief. I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I've got on the line my good friend, Andy Bardon. Andy, how's it going, buddy?
Doing great, Jim. Thanks for having me on the show, man. Looking forward to it.
So I've been chasing you through time zones this last week. You're in Hawaii right now?
Yep, I'm in Hawaii over here for a couple weeks. My girlfriend has gone in with a business partner, and they purchased a yoga studio. So they sort of rehabbed the place, put a facelift on it, hired a whole staff, and so they'll alternate, a couple months here, a couple months there, and so popping in to support her and hang in Hawaii for a little bit in between jobs.
That's awesome. Well, I had the pleasure of spending a few days with you in Mexico 2 weeks ago on a special project that I want to get to at the end of the show because I know it's a really important next component of your life. But, a guy like you, you're no stranger to traveling around the world and bouncing through time zones, Mexico, back to home to Jackson Hole, and then out to Hawaii. You've been doing it your whole life almost, huh?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. I grew up outside of New York City, of all places, just, the barefoot kid climbing trees, shirtless, playing in the mud. And I sort of always had that adventurous, wandery thing going on. And as soon as I had the opportunity after high school to head west, I did. I went out to Colorado and cut my teeth there, climbing and skiing in the backcountry, exploring the mountains, mountaineering, doing some ice climbing as well. Ended up going to university there, and then once I graduated, was off and running. Went out to Yosemite National Park, slept in caves, worked for a concessionaire so I could rock climb. I worked at night so I could climb during the day, and then I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming to ski. So I bartended at night at fancy hotels, and there were short hours, good tips. I could ski every day, adventure, and be in the mountains, and that rolled right into the next thing, which was becoming a mountain guide. I worked with some mountain guides, it's one of the premier guiding services in the world, and took people up the Grand Teton, 13,770 feet. And yeah, ever since then, I sort of have been bouncing all over the world, climbing, skiing, and was able to eventually transition that into my next career, which was becoming a professional photographer.
Wow. Sounds like you've had one hell of an adventure so far in life, and I want to cover some of those things that you just talked about. So you grew up in New Jersey. Now, traditional household for you, or, going through high school there, obviously you said you moved on and went to college in another state, but did you have jobs when you were a kid, or what created this adventurous entrepreneurship lifestyle you have?
I mean, that was way back, like 5 years old, belly crawling away from my family at picnics into the woods, or if we went down to the beach. There's photos of me at like 3, belly crawling up into the dunes solo. And I that was a traditional upbringing as far as I can tell. My core family, my folks are still together. I had a brother or sister. So all was normalish there, and I just sort of had the bug. And it was more of an exploratory, adventurous attitude than either of my siblings. And I think that was ingrained early on, from the offset. And I don't know how my upbringing affects that essentially, but I suppose I had a secure enough upbringing that I felt that I could be independent and be adventurous and come back to some type of stable unit, which was a family and support.
Yeah. Now, your parents, they have you working when you were a kid, before you went to college? You worked through high school or anything like that, or just kind of self-supported by the family?
No, I mean, that was, here's a shovel. It snowed. You're 7, you're 8, and I'd go scrape the driveway, and then the lawnmower, and sort of got on it early with my dad, not by choice. Obviously, as a 7 or 8 or 9 or 10-year-old, you're not stoked to be shoveling the old lady's driveway that lives next door, but it ended up being a great foundation, and I learned to really enjoy the hard work and the reward of completing a job to the best of your ability. And I didn't care if it was the yard or driveways or construction or bussing tables, anything I did through those teenage years. If wood had to be stacked, I'd stack to the best of my ability, and that felt good in and of itself. And that's stuck with me, and that's allowed me to become independent, and wrap things up and have the confidence to sort of steer things and complete tasks, both in my current career and in my next one, which we'll get into.
Yeah. We have a lot of people on this show that talk about, things that they've said yes to throughout their life to be successful and how they gain that success. But I also feel like we have a fair amount of parents that are looking for guidance in how to raise their kids, or what types of pressures to put on their kids that seem fair, that result in some type of positive, influence on their lives. And, most of the people on the show that are successful entrepreneurs had a similar upbringing to you, where you're doing household chores and having that responsibility that you learn along the way. You mentioned those things carried on through your whole life, and I think that's an important aspect of learnings at a young age that you can apply when you become an adult.
Yeah, agreed, for sure. I think a huge part of that too is failure, and falling down and getting back up. And, you learn that in sport early on, skateboarding, climbing, skiing, biking, you're going to eat shit, and you got to get back up. And so I feel like early on, I got immediate feedback from ripping around on my BMX bike with my friends, and then skateboarding, and then climbing. And I mean, climbing, you're falling more than you're succeeding. And I think that, I've been able to take lessons from sport, I guess, and apply that to business and life as well. In terms of the entrepreneurial thing and the upbringing, I think, the biggest thing I've learned, and so now we'll get into the next phase. So I worked as a mountain guide, and then the whole time I was taking photos with just a point and shoot camera that I had in my backpack. And I had a passion for creativity, but for some reason I didn't believe that career would be for me. It was for somebody else. It was for, the guy down the street, or some guy 10 years older than me. And then, I submitted photos one time that I'd shot to an outdoor gear manufacturer named Black Diamond. And it's a photo of a friend of mine on the side of El Capitan on day 3 of a 5-day climb. So we're sleeping on the side of the wall, you're eating 3 meals a day. It's basically vertical construction to climb El Cap. Mm-hmm. And I submitted a photo of my friend using the equipment. There's a big logo on it, and they decided to purchase it for, more than 2 weeks worth of guiding work. So all of a sudden here I am pricing myself out, saying, this isn't for me, this isn't for me. And then I get feedback that says otherwise. And so I guess I sort of learned that, my own barrier of disbelief there had created sort of a block. And so then I set out to explore that. It's like, what else am I wrong about? What else do I have preconceived notions about that just aren't quite right? And I think, that's how I found you in the Say Yes podcast. And it's allowed me to really break down some of the boundaries that are self-imposed that, I think stop an entrepreneur in their tracks. If you don't believe that it's possible, you shouldn't even start. You gotta get that from the onset.
Well, I also buy into that notion that sometimes what you're good at is right in front of you, and here you are on the side of this rock taking a photo that you didn't think much about at the time, I'm sure, until you submitted it, and it created some value there. And I think oftentimes things that other people are good at are right there in front of them if they took the time to recognize it or at least explore those other avenues like you did.
For sure. And again, and when I showed up in Yosemite Valley, I was pretty green. I wasn't able to climb El Cap. I wasn't able to climb Half Dome. And I think that's where I learned that my own barrier of disbelief was preventing some of those goals from happening. Because all of a sudden, I tried to climb the nose of El Cap. I failed. Tried a second time. I failed. And we didn't really bail for like legit reasons. I think we were just kind of scared and didn't have our scene together as much as we could have. And then I succeeded. And I had previously thought that wasn't really possible. And so that recalibrated my notion of what I could do. And all right, well, let's reset again. What else can we do? Well, let's go do Half Dome. Let's go do El Capitan in a day, in under 24 hours, where you don't sleep at all. You just push. And so you start doing these things and you start to realize, wow, these self-imposed limitations that I have are just that, self-imposed. And I went down the rabbit hole about the creative process and about the making of things, because photography is a creative art. And I came across a interview with an old skateboarder. Have you ever heard of Rodney Mullen?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
He's did all these crazy street tricks back in the 80s and early 90s, right? Rodney Mullen made up hundreds of tricks. The Casper slide and all these heel flips and variations and variables. And he did some TED Talk. I'll find it and I'll send it to you so you can link it. But one of his quotes was, "The greatest obstacle to creativity is your own barrier of disbelief." And by that, he means if you're doing something that hasn't been done before, or if you're doing something that you haven't done before, the first step in getting it there is believing and envisioning that that's going to happen. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but it's completely true. And so I ran with that concept that, you know what, I'm going to believe that I deserve to have the opportunity, and I'm going to work my butt off to become a professional photographer. And, a decade later, I've traveled all over the world to Mount Everest with National Geographic, diving under the waves of Chopu and Tahiti, documenting the rate of glacial change in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and skiing off the highest peaks in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. It's been incredible. And all of that literally was from a light switch decision of turning it on and being like, this can happen, and I'm going, and let's start.
Yeah. Andy, I don't want to deny our listeners kind of the magnitude of some of these projects, because I think they're incredible in themselves. As an example, you talk about your first trip up El Cap, and, day 3, you finally snapped that picture. Can you describe to people, that have no idea what El Cap is or has seen it, maybe they've seen it in pictures, but what is that piece of granite, and what's the height and some of the specifics of that climb, just to give us an idea on where you took that picture? Yeah,
so this is a 3,000-foot wall. How many Empire State Buildings on top of each other? I don't know. We'll have to find a photo or something to illustrate it, but it's nearly a mile high, and you're carrying all your equipment with you in these big bags called haul bags. We nicknamed them pigs. So you're hauling your pig up with you, and you almost have a cot that you have to sleep on. I'll send you a photo of the first photo that I sold. And you're entirely self-sufficient. So for 5 days, you're sleeping on the side of the wall. You're working your way up these crack systems. You're bringing your food. It's crazy camaraderie with a friend. And in the photo I'm going to send you, we're in a severe thunderstorm, and the wall is so steep and so overhanging that it's, if you think of a gutter or being, on the porch where it's coming off the roof, but you're sitting under the porch. Mm-hmm. We were tucked under this really, really steep section, and we just put out our what we call a portaledge, that cot that you sleep on, and had some food, listened to music, and we laughed, and it was just a surreal